All right, you guys, welcome to the Inflammation Secrets training. I am Dr. Nancy Kroll. I am going to be leading you and guiding you and teaching you for the next hour-ish. If you have a hard stop in an hour, you might want to just know that you're going to want to watch the replay. I have a tendency to over provide, so I have a feeling that it's going to be hard for me to squeeze everything into 60 minutes, but I'm going to try my best. So let's go ahead and get started. What I wanted to kind of go over was like a lay of the land, let you know who this training is for. This training is for every human being on this planet, every single human being. The fact that out of my huge email list, there were only 350 people signed up for this training was I mean, it's still quite a bit of people, but it still was a shock to me because I think every single person needs to hear this information, whether you're an infant or an elderly or somewhere in the middle. We are all dealing with inflammation, okay? This is especially for you if you already have symptoms related to inflammation, because even though, the reason I say it's for everybody is that everybody is dealing with inflammation constantly. And the symptoms are kind of an end result of an ongoing process. So it's especially for you if you have symptoms associated with inflammation. So autoimmune disease, heart issues, cancer, pain in the body, skin disorders, insomnia, hormonal imbalances, anxiety, depression. What else? The list can go on and on, but if you actually have a symptom or a diagnosis, this is especially for you. And then again, as I said, I think this information is pertinent to every human being on planet Earth because we are all inflamed. Mother Earth is inflamed as well. So what are you going to learn on this training? I'm going to teach you what inflammation is. I feel like, I don't know, like everyone kind of knows generally what inflammation is, but not on a deeper sense. So I'm going to teach you what inflammation is, what is the inflammatory process, why it's important, why it's not always bad. And then I'm going to teach you the main causes of inflammation from like a negative standpoint. And then I'm going to show you how I utilize my 5-step method to address these different types of inflammation with my own clients and how that process was beneficial for me. I also am at the end of this training, I am going to open it up for anyone who is interested in actually starting to address their inflammation and potentially work with me. I do offer free calls at the end of most of my trainings. So if you at some point during the training already know that this is something that you would like to discuss with me, I'm just going to be open now. You can book the call at any time during the training by going to talktodrnancy.com. The reason why I'm saying that now is because I have very limited time on my schedule. So as soon as I open it up and send it to my email list, it's going to book up. So if you know, like, hey, I'm really resonating with this, I'm resonating with what she's saying, I'm ready for, creating something different, you can sign up for that call at any time during this training. So what is possible for you when you reduce inflammation? I think basically your entire life state of being, everything's just different for you if you reduce inflammation. And when we're talking about inflammation, and I'm going to go further into this, I'm talking about pathological inflammation. So the kind of inflammation that we don't want happening, but it's affecting everything from your mood to your hormones, to your gut, to your energy levels, to the way you appear, to your body weight, right? It really, really is affecting everything. So if you're able to, find a homeostasis or balance in your inflammatory response and only have, healthy inflammatory responses, you're gonna be thriving, right? And I feel like so many people on our planet right now are in a survival mode because of the state of inflammation that they're in. And we're going to talk about the different kinds of inflammation and how that shows up. But even, whether someone has a lot of money or a little bit of money, I'm seeing similar patterns, right, in their inflammatory levels. And we'll talk about why that is. So who am I? If you're on this training, you probably have a general idea of who I am, but there's some people that are likely new to my email list and some of you that have been following me for a long time. So I'm just going to do a little short introduction to who I am. My name is Dr. Nancy Kroll. I'm a doctor of Oriental medicine. I've been practicing for the last 10 years, and for the last 4 years, I have been running online health transformation programs for driven individuals who realize that they've reached a plateau in what they are able to create because of their health, right? I blend Eastern medicine and functional medicine with transformational mindset work to create lasting results for individuals. My personal story, you guys have probably heard it as well, but again, there's maybe someone in here that hasn't, but my personal health journey has been a long one. Like many of you, it's had different seasons, right? Different seasons, but it basically started after 10 years of taking the pill as an adolescent. I went off of it and my body went crazy. And I ended up with cystic acne, and it really, I knew at the time, I was like in my early 20s, that it was something internal, and it led me on a kind of quest to figure it out. And in the process, I eventually became a doctor of Oriental medicine, and my health kind of hit another plateau after the birth of my son. And in hindsight, I was likely Hashimoto's or somewhere on that inflammatory spectrum, didn't know it, lots of anxiety, panic attacks, insomnia. I look back on photos of me and I'm so red, my eyes are red, I'm just so inflamed. And didn't know it, right? And that really led me on a journey to study further into kind of the bioindividuality that's available now with labs, underlying infections, what we're going to be talking about. And really, I was, in a nutshell, decreasing my overall inflammation, right? And so I used to suffer from nightly insomnia, headaches, body aches, so like joint pain, emotional instability, kind of like really weepy and crying, painful periods. What else? I said anxiety. And it was livable. Okay, this is what I also want to tell you guys, like, and I still got by. And I think that's the dangerous part of it, is when we have these symptoms and we can still be highly functioning, like many of you probably are, it's kind of dangerous because we power through. We're really good at powering through, and we live in a society that teaches us to power through and not listen to those symptoms. And that can really snowball. But luckily, around when my son was 2 years old, I realized, that something had to stop. And I did start making changes and investing in my health in a different way, and mentorships, and actually doing a lot of inner self-development work, which we're going to discuss as well in this training. So now here I am, and I'm sure I still have some inflammation because I'm a human being on planet Earth, and we are causing a lot of damage to our planet, and we're around toxic substances all the time, whether that's EMFs and our just touching, the formaldehyde in a wooden object, or paint in the, air quality is bad, all of that stuff. But I am in a lot better place than I was all of my adult life. So I lay down, I go to sleep within 15 minutes. I sleep through the night. My skin is clear. So that acne problem that kind of led me to my health journey is no longer an issue for me. I mean, I have the occasional breakout if I use something that my skin doesn't like, but it's not the same as it was. I don't have any digestive issues. I don't get gas and bloating. I have regular bowel movements. I know this is too much information, but I'm just painting the picture of like where I was and where I am now. My emotions are stable. I have a regular cycle. Like, I am not really held back by my body anymore, right? I have energy throughout the day. And so that's why I really wanted to share all of this information with you guys, because when I looked at why am I where I am now compared to where I was in the back then, is because of inflammation. I've been able to reduce my inflammation so much. And that's really what is at the root of this entire process that I lead all of my clients through as well, is reducing inflammation. So I'm very, very excited to share this with you guys. All right. So, and as I mentioned, those of you that are just hopping on, there's no fancy slides. Okay, you're gonna have to look at me this entire training, but I will try to break it up and have some interaction. I really love that. So if there's questions that come up while I'm talking, feel free to put them in the chat. And as I kind of go back and forth from my notes to the screen, I'll be checking in with you guys, okay? All right, so before I do get started, what I would love to do is those of you that are on live is share in the comments what kind of inflammation you have, or what kind of inflammation do you think you have, or why is it that you're here? What is inflammation? Amanda asks, what's my website? My website's Dr. Nancy Kroll. So just down there at the bottom, you see my name, it's all one word or whatever, just .com. So can you guys just share in the comments, what is inflammation to you? Like, what do you, gut issues? Yeah, gut issues and inflammation. Who else? Who else knows what sort of inflammation they have going on? I was clueless that I had inflammation. Is anyone in here just kind of in here because they suspect they have inflammation? All right. I have inflammation from parasitic infections, osteoarthritis. All right. Oh, hey, Paula. Paula's in my Inside Out program. Patty. Hi, Jenny. I've seen some familiar faces. After workouts, arthritis and insomnia, RA. Yeah. Polymyositis. Yeah. Anything with itis at the end, we know that's inflammation, right? So if anyone in here has a diagnosis with itis at the end, it's an inflammatory condition. Okay, Amy, you know that you have some parasites, spawny, gut issues, and joint inflammation. Yeah. Irritable bowel. Amanda's in here for her kiddo. Yeah. So Carrie, let's circle back to that. If I forget, just remind me. Okay, I'll come back to that question. Colleen has hypothyroidism, RA. Yeah, so you had a post-COVID flare. You're in remission. Oh, Rhonda, I'm so glad you're better. Hodgkin's lymphoma survivor. Hi, Erin. My brother had non-Hodgkin's lymphoma a couple years ago. Donna, haven't felt well, thyroid nodules, anxiety, body pain. Yeah, so sometimes it's just we don't feel well. We don't actually know what it is, right? And that's really, really common. And I'm going to talk into this, but there's a spectrum here. There's a spectrum here. All right. So type 1 diabetes, Hashimoto's, RA, and lupus. Clara, yeah. So notice how Clara has a kind of a list of autoimmune conditions. This is important for all of you to understand, is once you have one autoimmune disease, like if you're significantly more inclined to have more, right? That inflammatory process has already started. So thank you for sharing, Clara. Brain fog, especially when you eat more inflammatory foods. Okay, Colleen. All right, so I'll come back to these if everyone else wants to share. I'm just gonna share a little bit about what inflammation is, okay? So what is inflammation? Inflammation is a normal response to our body's immune system. Inflammation is a normal response of our body's immune system to our own selves and the world around us. Okay, it's normal. It's a good thing. We want inflammation, right? We kind of spend our entire life thinking like, oh, we got to get rid of this inflammation. But inflammation is actually a good thing. Inflammation is basically our body's response to, or is our body's ability to repair in response to, say, a sprained ankle or a broken bone. It's how your body reacts to foreign invaders like bacteria, viruses, or the normal breakdown of cells and the clearance of waste material in your body. Inflammation is the intricate part of how our immune system responds, okay? So I think that's first thing that I want everyone to just take in. I think it's so easy within the health paradigm for us to want what we're experiencing to go away, or think that we're broken, or think that there's something wrong with us when we're suffering from ongoing symptoms. And I first want everyone just to like hear me and take this in, that there's absolutely nothing wrong with you. Okay, that you're not broken, that your body is having a normal response. And you just haven't quite figured out what that mechanism loop is, right? Of why you're getting stuck in it, okay? The symptoms are just the messengers. We don't need to hate them, okay? Even though they can be annoying sometimes, okay? So the first concept I want you guys to understand about the immune system and inflammation is that 99.99% of the time our immune system's response to a potential attack is to do nothing. It absolutely does nothing, okay? We have two major arms in our immune system. They're called Th1, the T helper cell, and Th2, the T helper cell 2, okay? And then these two systems are regulated by something called T regulatory cells. They're called Treg cells, right? You guys are gonna get like, it's not gonna be really in depth, but I'm gonna teach you this because it's important. So it's even really important just to kind of understand when we're thinking about the pathogen that's been passed around in the last year, because it affects this part of our body as well, right? So if we have an understanding around this, it's important. So Th1, what is Th1? Th1 is the system that is key to your innate immune system. This system is pre-programmed to attack parasites, viruses, and cancer cells. It works mainly through pattern recognition receptors on cell surfaces. It's pre-programmed to recognize certain cells as normal and do nothing. When you sprain an ankle, this system is what recognizes damaged cells and goes in to clean up the damaged cells and allows your tissue to repair itself. When you eat mushrooms, this system recognizes the fungus as non-self but does nothing. But if an abnormal, dangerous pattern is recognized, then these cells become activated to remove the abnormal pattern. For example, when a mutated cell is formed in your body, so a mutated cell could be even like a cancer cell, right? The Th1 cells sense it, attack it, break it down, and help recycle its parts for use in a new healthy cell. When a new virus or bacteria invades your body, this system recognizes it as non-self, but dangerous, and engulfs it, okay? Th2. The Th2 cell is responsible for making antibodies, okay? So those of you in here with autoimmune stuff, this is part of that process too, right? When you get a new bacterial or viral infection, the activated Th1 cells involve the Th2 cells to start making antibodies against the invader. Once this system is ramped up, it wages a full-scale attack in your body, pouring millions of antibody particles specially made to invade the virus, bacteria, or damaged cells. For this reason, it's also called the adaptive immune system. During its activation, your lymph nodes swell up when you get sick and your whole body aches. Once the battle is over, your Th2 cell makes memory antibodies and cells that then will circulate in your body and react quickly if the invader shows up again. Okay, so your body then creates a memory of this, right? These two systems, the Th1 and Th2, are in constant communication and balance each other without ever knowing. So if you guys are just hopping on, if you hear hacking in the background, that's why I'm hiding in my room. My son has a cold. So it's the quietest place to be. Cytokines, this is another important part of this. So you guys may have, for the first time, heard of what a cytokine was this year or last year. It's all one blending into a long year, 2020, like 1, 2, 3. Cytokines, because we've heard about cytokine storms, right? So what are cytokines? Cytokines are activated immune cells, also activated immune cells also create mediators of inflammation. Okay, so they buffer it, called cytokines, that travel through your body and turn up or down your immune system in other parts of your body. If, for example, you get the flu, your cells make a cytokine called interferon that travels throughout your body, activating your immune system elsewhere. Interferon also makes your bones and muscles hurt, makes you feel achy, and causes your brain to shut down so you can rest and divert your energy into fighting off the flu rather than working, thinking, etc. Okay, so the last part of the immune system, and you're probably thinking, why am I talking about the immune system? Well, because the immune system and inflammation are very interconnected, okay? The last part of the part of your immune system that I'm going to discuss is called your complement system. This system enhances your antibodies and your Th1 cells with their job, makes them more efficient. When activated, it makes holes in offending cells and literally makes them explode. Once it's activated, it can work on exploding cells marked by the Th1 or Th2 system. This system is a part of your innate immune system, but interacts with your adaptive immune system. So it's both changeable and non-changeable, okay? This is just the beginning of the complexity of your immune system. When it's properly regulated, you always have a low-grade inflammation. So we want constant low, this is going to be confusing. When it's properly regulated, you will always have low-grade inflammation that helps you heal, fight off invaders, clean up toxins, and regulate hormones. Okay, so this is what I'm saying. Inflammation isn't necessarily always bad, okay? Typical lab markers for inflammation are white blood cell count, ESR, which is red cell sed rate, C-reactive proteins, platelets, and ferritin. When the system becomes dysregulated, okay, whenever it's not kind of just low grade, you can get autoimmune diseases, uncontrolled cancer, have poor wound healing, foggy thinking, excessive fatigue, develop plaques in your arteries, protein buildup in your brain, such as Parkinson's or Alzheimer's, and even have poor bone formation, such as osteoporosis. Okay, so that's that in a nutshell. So what is it that causes inflammation? So there's a variety of things that can cause inflammation, and I'm going to talk to you about the 5 major categories that can cause inflammation and immune system dysregulation. This is going to be really basic. And then I'm going to come back around and share with you how my 5-step process addresses each one of these. And then I'm going to kind of interact, but I just want to make sure no one has any questions so far. Okay, we're good. All right, there's questions in here. Post-concussion syndrome. Okay, IBS. Okay, good. All right, everyone's good. All right. And then those of you watching Facebook, I'll come to that in a minute. All right, so what causes inflammation? I think most of you probably already have an idea of there's inflammatory foods, toxins, right? Actually, let me know in the comments, what do you think causes inflammation? I like to interact with you guys. What do you think causes inflammation? Stress. Okay, Patricia says stress. Anything else? Food. Anyone else? Toxins, yeah. Parasites, infections, disease. Sugar. Pesticides, emotions. Stuck energy, hormones, stress. Yeah. You guys got a lot of all of that, yeah. All of it. Life, right? I mean, anger, yeah. Life is causing inflammation. All right, so the 5 major ones that I'm going to talk about, trauma, that's a good one. The 5 categories I'm going to be going into are trauma, infections, deficiencies, toxins, and stress. So I'm going to kind of go into them on like a superficial level, and then when I go through the 5-step method, I'll be going a little bit deeper into them, okay? So trauma, when I'm thinking about trauma right now, in this regard, I'm not thinking about it in a psychological trauma. There's all these different types of trauma, right? So we have physical trauma, we have external trauma, we have internal trauma. And the trauma that I'm talking about here is more of the external trauma, meaning basically when we twist our ankle and we, hit our thigh, right? Like a physical trauma, we're in a car accident, okay? The typical reaction that our body has will be redness, heat, fever, swelling, loss of function, right? And trauma is best characterized as all of those signs, and the cause of it, of the inflammation, is all of the above. After the initial trauma, the contents of the damaged cells are released, as well as the chemical mediators, remember those cytokines, and they get the immune system on board, and they start to eat all the dead stuff, and they're trying to clean up, and new cells are made, right? And we have this whole healing process that happens to create new tissue. So at the end, balance is achieved in the local tissues, and the system goes back to its normal business as usual thing. The problem is that when our system is dysregulated or overwhelmed, the local inflammation and healing process becomes more generalized and involves the entire body. So having that physical trauma can then overload other organ systems. So this can actually affect even organ failure could occur. This is what happens after a major physical trauma like a fall or a car accident, right? So this isn't just kind of like I stubbed my toe. Like obviously your body's going to be able to handle that, but like bigger traumas where the physical aspect is then going into other organ systems. Because as much as we'd like to think that nothing is related, it's all connected. So that's kind of just one aspect, right? That's like the physical part. And I'm going to talk about a little bit later how the limbic system actually can be impacted by that physical form of trauma as well. So another form of inflammation that I saw a few of you are actually aware of and even listed are infections. So I think in the functional medicine world, we're becoming more and more aware of the fact that infections, underlying latent infections, silent infections, are a huge cause of a lot of disease patterns, right? So most of us have had strep throat, and I'm just gonna kind of go through an inflammatory, sorry. As I'm talking, you guys, I'm just gonna be completely transparent. As I'm talking, I don't know if you guys read my email about my dad, like a messenger message comes up about my dad, which is like my biological father. He has a lot of inflammation in the hospital right now. It was so ironic right now. I don't know how to turn, if you guys ever know how to turn off the messenger thing, let me know. I don't know how to get it out of my computer. So anyways, so infections, I'm going to kind of walk you through how infections just show up on an acute level and then how that manifests on a chronic level. Because again, the inflammatory response to infections acutely, nothing is actually ever bad. Like we want to move out of good, bad, right, or wrong. It's just, it becomes problematic when we don't. Health is fluidity, health is movement, health is shifting. So disease patterns start when we become stuck in patterns, right? And so the same with infections and inflammation. So most of us have had strep throat. We ache all over, you get red, large tonsils, you're laid up in bed for a few days. You have the signs of inflammation as trauma, right? You don't feel well, but maybe it's just localized to your throat. And your immune system comes in to the rescue, it walls off the infection, it attacks it, it kills the infected cells, it repairs the damaged tissue, and in a week, you're as good as new. I mean, sometimes some of you might have had to take antibiotics if you didn't have a strong immune system, but hypothetically, our body is resilient enough to come in and fight it, right? This system also can become derailed. So if, let's say, for example, you're colonized with strep throat, and you're genetically vulnerable and your body can make antibodies also that attach to your heart. So rheumatic heart disease, your kidneys, or even for young children, it can trigger PANDAS, right? An autoimmune brain condition. So certain viruses that are suppressed can become reactivated as well. So a big one like that is Epstein-Barr virus. I don't know if anyone had mono as a younger child. That was me in my 20s. Didn't kiss anyone. I don't know how it happened, but I ended up in bed for a month with that. But certain viruses can remain dormant in the body, become reactivated, and result in limited diseases. There's other kind of things like shingles from chickenpox, or even certain cancers like Burkitt's lymphoma from Epstein-Barr virus. And there's just so many different forms of infections that are, there's Lyme disease. We could even probably put mold exposure in this category, right? I would even put parasites and gut dysbiosis in this category, right? Different forms of infections that can cause this inflammatory cycle. But you're getting the idea that there's both the acute and the chronic infections that cause inflammation. So hopefully you're starting to see a pattern that in balanced body systems, inflammation is crucial for health, and in imbalanced body systems, the inflammatory cycle is actually detrimental to our health. Okay. So toxins. So toxins are something that I think are, I don't know, in my experience, even though I know about them, and I live a pretty low toxic lifestyle. Like I don't have toxic chemical sprays in my house. I eat organic, but it's kind of the one that's harder to focus on sometimes because we can't live in a bubble, right? And it's hard to be perfect, but it is definitely an overlooked form of inflammation. There's a difference between a toxin and a toxicant. Okay, so I'm going to define what those are. A toxin is a substance produced by another living organism or a natural substance that can cause damage to the human body. An example would be a poisonous mushroom. A toxicant is a man-made substance that can cause damage and or disease to your body. An example would be a pesticide. So oftentimes when we're talking about toxins, I think the average person is probably talking about toxicants, but I'm just going to call them toxins right now for simplicity's sake. So toxins can be acutely inflammatory. So a high dose chemical exposure or low-grade inflammation by chronic low-grade exposure. So as I mentioned, the walls in this room, I highly doubt are low VOC paints. All of this furniture, I'm sure, has been treated with chemicals, right? My computer is toxic. I mean, literally, like most of this room is toxic. That's kind of like a low-grade exposure happening, right? Unless you guys are living out in the forest and in huts or something like that, which most of us aren't. And then there's people that can have like a chemical exposure from cleaning chemicals, or we're seeing more cases be like the pesticide, people suing pesticide companies and that sort of thing, and actually proving that there's like health factors involved in that. So what happens through the toxins is something called toxin-induced loss of tolerance. And the loss of tolerance is also related to many autoimmune conditions and digestive issues, because we can have loss of oral tolerance and loss of self-tolerance as well. But there's also TILT, toxin-induced loss of tolerance. So the basic concept is that low-grade exposure to chemicals and heavy metals will bind to proteins in your body and then create a structure that your body doesn't recognize. And then this activates your immune system to become clear to come and clear out the substance, but because the exposure is ongoing, the low level inflammation doesn't resolve. So eventually your immune system can become so disorganized that it creates antibodies to the altered proteins that will also react against heavy or healthy cells. This is called molecular mimicry. And this can also happen with foods. So this is how certain foods, healthy foods, can then cause problems in the body is due to the same thing called molecular mimicry. And it's a whole emerging cause of autoimmune disease, right? It's this molecular mimicry. So just a kind of simple example of this is gluten. Those of you that have been following me for a long time know that I 100% advocate everybody not eat gluten no matter what you have going on, but especially if you have any sort of thyroid condition. Gluten has molecular mimicry with the thyroid, right? And so what happens is when you have a gluten exposure, the body goes in to attack the gluten, and then it also ends up attacking the thyroid, okay, and causing an inflammatory response. So the issue with toxin exposures is that it's not a simple one-to-one correlation. It's really complex, and there's so many different toxins. The average woman puts over 150 chemicals on her body each morning before going to work. If you are, I'm assuming that people that are following me are not doing this, but if you haven't gotten on board with a non to low toxic lifestyle, it's time to start sourcing your beauty products and your home cleaning products and everything for more natural things. There's over 80,000 chemicals that have been produced and are in production in the US, and many of them find our way into our environment. So the other thing is that we're using all of these products and then they're finding their way into our water systems. And, we're then bathing in, they can't pull them out when they clean our water. So then we're bathing in them, or some of you might be drinking them. If you don't have a good quality water filter, it's continually being cycled back in. Same thing with microplastics, right? Plastic is also considered a toxin that we're ingesting. So it's really hard to separate being an environmentalist and wanting to be healthy. I think if you want to be healthy, you also need to become an environmentalist or you don't have to, you're naturally going to become one because those choices are going to benefit the earth. So whatever way you want to walk in that door, but the health of our planet does impact our health, right? So as long as there's toxins being circulated in our environments and in our planet, we are going to be suffering from that. And as long as we are putting those products on our bodies and ingesting them, our planet is going to be suffering. So those are really, really connected. To date, all safety studies are on single chemicals and fail to take into account their interactions with the human body. Okay, so the powers that be don't really care about how these chemicals are really affecting your health. All right, so this is another one that a lot of you mentioned as being a cause of inflammation, and this is stress. And I'm going to go further into this kind of more from a trauma, like psychological trauma thing a little bit later, but stress is one of the most prevailing yet unknown causes of inflammation of our country today. In our country, I'm talking the world, right? I'm American, but it's everybody. So there's a whole field of stress-induced inflammation that's called psychoneuroendoimmunology, okay? And the basic concept of is that stress in your mind releases signaling molecules that travel via your nervous system to all the organs attached to your nervous system. The effect is especially potent in your hormone system, so your endocrine system and your immune system. Over time, the chronic stress that initially caused a heightened sense of hormone and immune response results in downregulation of these systems and eventually is left unchecked and causes their dysregulation. So what does that mean? I don't know if you guys, some of you have worked with practitioners and some of you haven't, but if you have, if anyone has ever run a hormone panel and shown, for example, that you have low cortisol, right? That's an example of a downregulated immune hormonal response. So what happens typically, let me give a real life example and then I'll talk about that for a minute. So what does this look like in real life? Let's just imagine that something or someone scares you. Okay, your innate nervous system response is to activate your adrenal glands and then release adrenaline to speed up your heart, muscles, and brain for action, right? So it's like it's powering you up to like get away from the threat. At the same time, your pancreas is stimulated to release a hormone called glucagon to elevate your blood levels to prepare you for rapid action. So your body wants you to be able to get out of there fast and run, right? So it's like ramping you up. The vagus nerve slows down the gut, slows down digestion, and diverts all the blood flow to your muscles. So anything that was happening in your gut stops. Blood flow goes to your muscles. Again, why? So that you can run, right? All this happens instantly. So awesome, right? And then like in a healthy situation, you run away, okay? You run away from the threat. Let's say there was an animal. Let's say that you ran into a bear, that whole response happens, you run away, and then the nervous system resettles. That's really what that whole system was created for. However, if the stressor does not resolve over time, your sleep can become disrupted. You can develop insulin resistance, which is a precursor to diabetes. You can start getting digestive issues, food intolerances, markers for inflammation, immune system dysregulation, because basically our body can't determine the difference between a real threat and a benign threat. So your body's response to daily stressors of being late for work, stuck in traffic, worrying over events in your news feed is all the same as if you were about to like have feast or famine or get killed in a war, right? Like your body is your brain is so primitive, it doesn't know the difference. So chronic stressors eventually affect your hormone levels, your immune system dysfunction, and even memory. And at a cellular level, the final common denomination for all of these is inflammation. So this one is like, I would say the most ignored, or at least least addressed, because so many people don't know how to actually address it, right? Like we all know, oh, stress is bad, but we don't know how to actually shift the way that our brain is taking in information. And I would say that, you know, I had a meeting, I'll just give an example. I had a meeting with my bookkeeper earlier today, and I watched my body do this as I was like anticipating the information she was giving me about like some numbers from last year, right? And I felt like my whole nervous system go up, right? And there was no bad news provided. There was nothing bad that happened, but like I had this whole neurochemistry response to it, right? And that would have been the same response as if, you know, someone was about to hurt me. And we have these events that happen continually through the day, and they can be turned on simply by a thought, right? Simply by an email, simply by that little text that popped up right on my screen. And that is one of the biggest things that I think that isn't being addressed. It's way easier to eat a low inflammatory diet, which we're going to talk about, and it's way easier to just use vinegar and essential oils to clean your counters. It's a lot harder to completely transform the way you think, believe, respond to life, right? That's like the deep inner work that really has to happen. So any questions about that before I start to demonstrate how I use my 5-step method to go into each one of these categories? You guys can put it in the chat. I'm going to look at the Facebook to see if there's any questions on there really fast. And then we'll keep going. Jen says, incredibly helpful. Yay! I'm so glad this is helping. So I think it's really empowering to understand the inflammatory process, right? Because otherwise it's just like, what is, like, it's like this kind of cloud of like inflammation, right? Like, what is it? But if we have an understanding of what it is, then we can feel empowered to really do something about it. All right, so there's no questions? Okay, yay, happy you're enjoying it, Donna. All right, so I'll come back to you guys. I'm just kind of looking at my notes. All right, so I have a 5-step method that I lead all of my clients through, whether they're in my Inside Out program or if they're in my private mentorship with me. It is basically a method that I created for myself and then have utilized successfully with hundreds of clients to help them reach their success and their health as well, right? So it's adaptable because it addresses different aspects of healing all at once. So I'm going to be going through the method systematically, but I want to really emphasize that nothing is happening in a linear fashion. So that's one thing you got to let go of. Healing is not linear. Okay. Healing is not, it's not like a step-by-step. I don't know how to explain it. Like, it's not the masculine, it's the feminine, right? It's a flow. It needs to come all together at once. There's pulsing that happens, there's fluidity. So everything that I'm going to be sharing with you, it needs to be happening all at once. The body, mind, and spirit needs to be nourished all at once so that you actually have the results you're wanting to create. If you kind of do it in this methodical way where you only do this and then you only do that and you only do this, this is where we kind of reach plateaus and have limitations in what we're able to create. And this is what I see with a lot of people that end up coming to work with me, is that maybe they did a gut healing protocol, but it had a very limited result in the end because they weren't addressing these other aspects at the same time. Or maybe they were going to therapy and maybe dealing with some emotional stuff, but they weren't healing the internal stuff at the same time, right? So instead of salami theorying and cutting things up, we need to make sure that we're treating ourselves as the whole self, the whole being that we are. So, and not in order of importance, but the first step to my method is clearing underlying causes of inflammation, such as gut dysbiosis, pathogens, and mold. Okay, so gut healing is something that's really in vogue at the moment. And so that's kind of the biggest thing for most individuals. Most people do have a gut dysbiosis of some form. What that means is that you have an imbalance in the microbiome in your gut. 90% of your immune system is in your gut. And when we're thinking about molecular mimicry, if we have something called leaky gut, which I'm going to talk about in just a little bit more in depth, but if we have leaky gut, we're going to be more prone to having issues with molecular mimicry because of the stuff that's supposed to be held in the gut. And when I'm talking about the gut, I'm kind of in this regard talking about the small intestine, because in reality our gut is our mouth all the way down to our anus, right? But in this regard, it's primarily the large intestine. But if we have if we have leaky gut and things aren't being contained and we're not breaking down our foods properly, we're going to have toxins and food particles in our bloodstream that need to not be there, right? And that's going to cause an inflammatory process. And part of the reason why we get leaky gut is from stress, which some of these things feed into one another, and that's why it can become really overwhelming sometimes. But it can also be from prescription drugs, poor diet, sugar, and then also, as I mentioned, the dysbiosis. So we have, when we're thinking about the microbiome, the gut microbiome in particular, we want diversity. So diversity equals health. The more diverse our microbiome is, the healthier our gut is. And I like to use the analogy of a rainforest. So imagine like a rainforest and has all these different animals and plants and fungi and ferns and leopards and monkeys, and I don't know, just like think of the most lush forest you can think of, right? And think about if someone came in and they just started picking out all of these ferns, right? And they cleared the entire forest of all these ferns. Well, the forest wouldn't just allow that space to be empty. Something would take its place, right? That's the same with our gut. So when we're eating certain foods or taking certain drugs, like even over the counters are really damaging, or birth control pill, antibiotics, right? All of these things, they're going in there, and the beneficial bacteria, I mean, all of them are beneficial to some degree, but there's ones that are more beneficial and ones that can be more invasive, but all of them have a purpose. So I don't want to make them all, like, even the bad ones aren't necessarily always bad, but we have these fragile beneficial bugs, for lack of a better term, that live in our gut, and they're the easiest to kill. So they're probably going to be the most impacted by your poor choices or whatever you're putting in their body. So they're kind of like the fern that's getting pulled out. And then the more aggressive bacteria that tend to cause health problems tend to be the more invasive ones that are going to take up that space, okay? Or parasites, or yeasts and fungi, all of that, right? And so that's basically a dysbiosis. It's an imbalance, right? It's an infection of some sort in the gut, and that can cause leaky gut as well, right? It can cause SIBO. It can cause, you know, a whole array of other things, and that can cause a whole inflammatory process. So we want to be able to clear the underlying cause of the inflammation through detoxing, right? Chelating heavy metals, making sure our body is clean and clear. We're pooping, we don't have infections in our gut, we're clearing any viruses, other pathogens, molds. We want to make sure we're addressing the physical body in that way if we want to address the inflammation. And that will support the body in so many amazing ways. Okay, so that's the first thing that I do with all my clients. And what you'll notice, and what I notice in most of my clients whenever you do this, is that you start to have more energy, you have less pain, you start to sleep better, right? I can't tell you, like, I noticed a decrease in my joint pain within the first 6 months of starting to address these underlying causes. Your life just starts to transform, but it's not just that in and of itself, because I'm sure there's plenty of you in here that have done that and still had limited responses, right? So how does that big puzzle come together? Well, the second part of my method is balancing the hormones and their neurotransmitters. So again, these are very interconnected. So if we have underlying infections, it's going to impact our hormones and our neurotransmitters, because most of our neurotransmitters are made in our gut. So if you guys aren't familiar with what neurotransmitters are, but they're things like serotonin, dopamine, GABA. They help us feel healthy and happy, and help so many different bodily functions, everything from sexual drive to feeling courageous, right? Feeling driven, all of those things. And those are impacted by our gut, so our hormones. But if our hormones are off, right, and we're not optimizing those as we're clearing infections, we can be left in a loop where our system isn't responding appropriately to triggers, right? So for instance, cortisol, we want to be having a healthy cortisol response. Cortisol's job is to mediate inflammation as well. And if we're, underproducing or overproducing cortisol because of our liver, how we're detoxing in our liver, if we have thyroid issues, that's going to affect our overall inflammation, okay, and how we feel. The third step in my method, it's called the root cause method, is identifying the emotional cause of disease. And so this is probably one of the most distinguishing features of the work that I offer my clients that isn't in other functional medicine programs. Most programs, you're going to probably deal with your pathogens and your hormones and stuff, but the emotional root cause of disease is something very special to working with me. And what that means is that I firmly believe that emotions are the root cause of disease. And how that looks is when we have a stagnant emotional patterns, that affects our neurochemistry and it affects our whole endocrine system, right? So the stress is one kind of a broad range, but different emotional patterns cause the same thing. So if we just know that we're generalized stress, that doesn't actually get us anywhere, right? It's like, oh, I'm stressed. But if I'm able to identify like, oh, when I read that email from my boss and I have that stressed reaction, underneath it is actually a belief that I am not good enough, right? And I feel grief from my early childhood, right? I'm just using this as like some random example. Then you're able to take that and do something with it and actually do something different. If you just know that you get stressed, you end up going into avoidance. And avoidance is not necessarily the best way of healing. You can find yourself in a very limited reality if you go into avoidance. When we go into avoidance, it narrows us so much that we no longer experience the complexity and joys of life, right? So if we're trying to avoid stress or triggers, whether that's on a physical sense, like if we're trying to avoid toxic triggers like exposures like foods or chemicals, or if we're trying to avoid emotional triggers, and again, this is not in abusive situations. Let's take this out of this context. We're talking about like normal day-to-day stuff. But if we're like talking about that, then it limits us. We're not able to have freedom. You're not really a true free person if you're having to limit your experience and your exposure so much. So true freedom comes from, true health, true fluidity comes from being able to identify your emotional cause of disease and then actually transforming it so you no longer give your power away to that thing, that person, that response, right? And you actually transform it and transmute it and are able to react to that situation in a completely different way. And the way in which we do that in my program, when clients work with me, is we do a lot of work with transformational mindset coaching and then also working with the limbic system. So if you guys aren't familiar with the limbic system, the reason why emotions cause disease is a lot to do with the limbic system. So the limbic system is in our central brain, and it's 4 parts of the brain that basically take in information and are in charge of how we process it, right? And so we have something called cross-wiring. And this is, again, our body, and this can be on a physical sense. So like, we'll use my son, my 8-year-old as an example, scallops. Okay, he one time got food poisoning from scallops. He now has cross-wired in his brain, scallops make me sick. Like, that's his belief. And some of you might have another cross-wiring, of a person, like this person makes me not feel well. This person stresses me out, cross-wired, right? And there are benefits to this cross-wiring. Like we know none of us are going around touching fires, burning ourselves. We're, not repeating mistakes, but there's ways in which the limbic system can work to our detriment as well. And so it's especially important when we think about the beliefs that we hold around certain things that are causing us stress, right? So for instance, we'll go back to that example of the email. If I have a belief that my boss is an asshole and is only like demanding things of me, and I have a feeling of feeling unworthy or unheard every time I read those emails, there's a negative cross-wiring that's happening. There's a flood of chemicals that is happening in my body every time I read those emails or interact with this human being. That's really, really unhealthy for you, right? And there's so many people on our planet that are living this way constantly, like unaware that that's even happening or that they can do anything to change it because they're stuck in victim consciousness. And I know that sounds like a very harsh way of saying it, but it's not like, oh, you're a victim, but it's the consciousness that most people on our planet are living in, and it's the consciousness of everything is happening to me and I can't do anything about it, right? And so whenever we're able to identify these emotional causes of disease, it actually puts us back into the driver's seat of realizing that, oh, this isn't me, this is my brain. This is my patterning. And whenever I'm able to recognize my patterning, I can actually do something about it. It's really, really empowering. So this is a super important part of addressing all of those things. So if we even go back to the different forms of inflammation, so there's trauma, physical trauma, infections, toxins, and stress. If we're not having this flood of endocrine hormones coming over our body, then our body isn't going to stay in an elevated state of inflammation. It's going to go back to reset, right? But if we're constantly up here in a hypervigilant state, which most people are in, our body doesn't end up going down regulated, right? Because it thinks that it's always in a state of threat, right? Because we're constantly thinking we need to run from a tiger, right? And therefore our digestion isn't functioning properly. All of the blood flow isn't going to the right places, basically, and all that. So the fourth part of my method, the root cause method, is healing the diet with personalized and intuitive eating. And this isn't intuitive eating like we kind of see on social media. I don't even know. It's more intuitive eating in the sense that we get to learn how to listen to our body's natural rhythms and have a connection with our environment in a way that cues us of what we should and shouldn't be eating. Okay, so what that looks like is never hear me say, this is the way that everybody should eat. Okay, you will hear me say that everyone basically shouldn't eat gluten and sugar and crap food, because I think everybody on this planet can agree with that, right? Chemicals. But I will never be the one that says the carnivore diet is for everybody, the keto diet is for everybody, plant-based diet is for everybody. Like, that is complete bullshit. There is no such thing as a diet that is for everybody in every part of the world all year long. That's just not health. Health is fluid. Therefore, our diet needs to be fluid. Our lives need to be fluid. There needs to be flow and movement and changeability, right? And so personalized intuitive eating is identifying the underlying food triggers for you. So with my clients, we typically do blood panels to find what foods are causing systemic inflammatory responses. That allows them to not just do a one-size-fits-all approach and actually see which foods are causing inflammatory responses to. They're having an inflammatory response to. Should they stay on that way of eating forever? No, because that will never be a forever reality, because their body is always changing. But if they're doing everything else in my method, they're clearing the pathogens and they're balancing their hormones and they're dealing with the emotional causes, then yeah, they take those out for that period of time to help encourage more healing and decreasing inflammation. Okay, I one time had a client who had a food panel like that done and then still hadn't eaten those foods 5 years later. A lot of times they're healthy foods, like non-inflammatory foods for the average person. That's not what those are for, right? It's information for the moment that's used in the moment. And then the other part is intuitive eating is something that I'm a huge advocate of. I'm currently living in the Yucatan Peninsula. There's no way what I'm eating should be the same thing that my friend in Alaska is eating. Like, the fact that we both have access to the same foods doesn't mean that we both should be eating it. It's confusing for our body. It's not in, we are in connection with our environment through our food. And we have lost that connection through being able to access every type of food all year long. So I'm a huge advocate of seasonal eating, shopping from your local farmer's market, growing your own food, having an interaction with your food. if you are being outside and getting sunlight during the day, during the summer, there's no way you're going to want to eat greasy fried food, right? Just the same as if you've been outside in the cold weather shoveling snow and in contact with your environment in the winter, you're not going to want to go inside and eat ice cream. The problem with modern life is that we have become disconnected from our environments, and that perpetuates our disconnection with our human bodies, and then adds to this inflammatory cycle, because we're going to end up putting foods into our body and supporting ourselves in ways that are not what our body needs. So that's a big part of that puzzle. And then the last part of my method is working with an expert that actually has a proven holistic formula. And the reason why I think this is such an important part, whether you decide that you resonate with my work or somebody else's work, but when you work with somebody else to support you in your healing, it is transformational, because I have never not had a mentor in the last 5 years. And what the benefit that I see in having a mentor is someone being able to see in your blind spots, someone being able to call you out on the stuff that your ego wants to continue to hold on to. Maybe even see how, self-diagnosing is never a smart move. We don't see ourselves with the same transparency as somebody else can see us. So it's really, really crucial that there is so far that we can get. And I know everyone has different financial ability. However, I'm a huge advocate of investing in yourself and investing in mentorship of some kind, so that you don't stay stuck. And the quickest way to success is to actually invest in somebody who's already gone through the journey that you've gone through, right? And we heal in community, right? It's just like relationship. Have you ever been single for a long time and everything's great, like you're doing great, and then all of a sudden you're in a relationship, whether it's a friend or a romantic relationship, and then you're super triggered and all your stuff's coming up to the surface and you're having to see stuff and see your patterns? Yeah, that's because it's healthy on some level that stuff's brought up to the surface so that we can deal with it and process it. And that's why mentorship and working with other people is really powerful, because in that process, there's stuff that's brought up and brought to light that wouldn't have happened if you stayed in by yourself, right? It's the same thing. We heal in connection with other human beings. So that is the 5-step method, and that's how I lead all of my clients, whether they're private or in my group program, through an inflammatory issue, which is most issues as we kind of realize today. So I'm going to just share with you guys a little bit about an opportunity I have, and then I'm going to open it up for Q&A. I actually was really good at getting it close to 60 minutes. So basically, I am opening the doors for my Inside Out program, which is my group program. In this program, I work with driven individuals who suffer from anxiety, gas and bloating, autoimmune disease, hormonal imbalance, inflammation, and fatigue. And these individuals have identified that their health is keeping them from enjoying the freedom lifestyle that they're creating. In the program, we run functional labs, identify physiological root causes for symptoms, and then also couple it with deep inner work to release beliefs, stories, emotions, and trauma patterns that are keeping them stuck. So my program is like no other program out there in the market, because we're actually reprogramming the body, mind, and spirit for lasting transformation. So if you'd like to apply for this program and get to the root cause of your inflammation, I am taking calls opening it up to talk to people to see if they would be a good fit. I'm very selective about who I bring into my program. So if you want to book a call, you can go to talktodrnancy.com. I have times opened up on Friday and Monday. And what we're going to cover on that call is we're going to go a deep dive into your health and emotional history to find out the cause of your inflammation, your gut health issues, your hormonal issues. I'm going to map out the exact steps we need to take in order to reclaim your health. And then if it's aligned, I'll offer a way to work with me. If it's not aligned, then at least you'll walk away with that map of the exact steps to take. Again, though, it's not a call just for free health advice. This is only for individuals that are actually interested in working with me. So if the call is for you, if you're ready to explore a solution to change your health, you're looking to get to the root cause of why you're struggling with your energy or inflammation, and you actually resonate with my work and the philosophy. So again, you can go to Talk to Dr. Nancy and we can chat. And then I'm just going to open it up for some Q&A and support you guys in a little deeper understanding. All right, let me just look at, so just so you guys know, if you go to Talk to Dr. Nancy, there's like 10 questions you have to fill out before you can book the call. And that helps me make sure that I have a better understanding of the health issues you've been dealing with and what you've tried and what's worked and what hasn't worked, because I don't take on people that I can't help. So if anyone has any questions about what I've covered, you can put it in the chat and I'll spend the next 10 minutes answering some questions. And then I'll also put in the chat just the, so does anyone, and if no one has any questions, we can wrap it up as well. Can you link your website here, Amanda? Yeah. Here you go. How would you rank the steps 1 to 5? As I mentioned, I don't think that they're rankable. I think that's the problem that we see and we see happen, is that one person, like, let's just say for marketing purposes, when we're running an online business, right? Like we see, like, it's the heavy metal expert, it's the parasite expert, it's the this expert, right? All of those things are important, right? All of them are important. So your hormones are important, your neurotransmitters are important, the underlying infections and toxins are important, your beliefs and how you relate to the world is important, being supported is important, right? So I would say, Erin, like, as much as like we want to make it linear, which is how the brain wants to do things, is like put things in order and boxes and categorize, that's what I have found, that it all needs to happen at once, right? It needs to all come together at once. Any other questions? I think there might be one on Facebook. Yeah, your engineering brain. Yeah. We all kind of want to put that linearly, right? It's kind of how we imagine the healing journey as well, of like climbing up a mountain and then getting at the top and being like, we made it, right? But those of you that have been on the journey for a while know that it's not quite like that. What was number 4 on the list of 5? Yeah, it was so clear underlying causes of inflammation, so gut pathogens, mold, balance hormones and neurotransmitters, identify emotional cause of disease, heal the diet with so number 4 is heal the diet with personalized and intuitive eating, and then work with an expert who has a proven holistic formula. Amanda, it's not on my website. You have to go to, I have a different landing page just for the call. So it's talktodrnancy.com. Danny says you mentioned deficiency as one of the categories, but didn't address it. Oh yeah, shoot, I didn't address it. Yeah, so one of the ways that, I'll cover that right now. So one of the ways deficiencies can actually cause inflammation. Sorry, thank you about that, Danny. I don't know how I completely skipped that. So one of the one of the ways that there's data associating selenium deficiencies with viral infections and certain types of heart disease. Vitamin D deficiency in the winter months is associated with more flus and winter infections. Vitamin C deficiency is associated with poor dental health, as well as poor wound healing. B12 deficiency is associated with nerve function and repair, as well as folic acid deficiency is affected to repairing your gut lining. So vitamin and mineral deficiencies are not specific to inflammation, but they do affect our body's natural healing process. And as a result, low-grade chronic inflammation can be due to that immune system dysregulation, right? So it's not like a direct line A to B, but if you have those deficiencies, your body's not going to repair as much, which is going to perpetuate the inflammatory cycle, right? So statistically, 80% of Americans are deficient in magnesium, 40 to 60 are deficient in B vitamins, and 30% are deficient in vitamin D. So thank you for reminding me to share that information. Anybody else have any questions? If not, we're going to wrap it up. I hope everyone got something out of this. You can let me know in the chat what your biggest takeaway was, or you can send me an email by responding to any of my emails just to let me know. I love hearing feedback on what you guys take away from the information I share. It helps me see how I'm serving you and how I can serve you better. And those of you in the Facebook group, thank you for joining me, and I will see you guys soon, okay? Bye-bye.